if it wasn't for those individuals.
Now, the British Army has issued an apology to a female soldier after she received racist and sexist abuse.
She's Kerry-Ann Knight, and she actually fronted the recruitment campaign for the army. She said she experienced years of racial slurs, including references to lynching her.
Have you ever seen the British Army recruitment posters? It was a black woman symbolizing strength and self-belief. Kerry-Ann Knight's image was seen by many, inspiring young people to join the army. But behind that confident look was a story of resilience, pain, and an unyielding fight for justice. This is the untold story of Kerry-Ann Knight, a former British soldier who appeared on recruitment posters for the British Army, who received a settlement and an apology after taking it to an employment tribunal over the racist and sexist abuse she was subjected to during her career. It was a campaign that promised a bright future. Kerry-Ann Knight, then 20 years old, was pictured on a recruitment poster with the words, "Your army needs you and your self-belief." She believed the army would offer stability, a type of family, and the chance to pave the way for other young black women. But her hopes were soon shattered. Let's take a step back. Who is Kerry-Ann Knight? Born and raised in the UK, Kerry-Ann joined the army at 20, filled with dreams of a fantastic career. She was posted to 26 Regiment Royal Artillery in Germany, expecting camaraderie and a supportive environment. What she faced instead was a relentless barrage of racism and sexism. During her 12 years of service, Kerry-Ann endured more than a decade of abuse. Male soldiers would call her a black bitch and make vile comments. "I had to serve alongside people that claimed to support the KKK, Britain First, and/or the English Defence League," she said in her witness statement provided to the tribunal. She said male soldiers would call her a black bitch, but say, "I'd still shag you though." "One evening I returned to my room to see someone had drawn images of huge black penises all over the wardrobes in my room," the statement said. The environment was hostile, and the emotional toll was immense. But why was Kerry-Ann chosen for the recruitment poster?
I can spot you.
Yeah.
Kerry-Ann Knight always knew she'd stand out. In an army struggling to recruit both women and ethnic minorities.
Were you the only black person in the...
Yeah, I was the only a black female.
She initially thought it was because of her achievements in training. However, she later realized it was because she was the only black woman in her regiment. She felt used, her image falsely portraying an inclusive army that did not exist. When she signed up for the campaign, Knight said she had this bright hope that I'm helping to change things. In promotional materials, she looks happy and excited, but when I turned up to the unit, that wasn't my lived experience, she said. There was a lot of sexism. However, when you put race into play as well, for me, it just felt like it was multiplied by 10.
I mean, just in case anyone listening or watching thinks she might be a bit of a snowflake, I mean, clearly the MOD and the Army absolutely agreed, ultimately, with her that her life had been made hell. She grew up in Nottingham, she enlisted at the age of 20, she went into the Royal Artillery, posted out to Germany, and she said there she had to serve alongside soldiers who praised Hitler and said that they supported far-right groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, the English Defence League, and Britain First. They shouted racially offensive slurs when she walked in the room. They said things that were clearly racially appalling. One point she was braiding her hair because they were doing a swimming exercise, and somebody turned to her. In fact, it was an instructor who turned to her and said, you know, "We're not in the ghetto here, you know," as though that was a racial slur. She said they were going to make my life a living hell. They told me they were going to, and they did. And she couldn't believe she'd been the poster girl for recruiting more people of colour into the army. Not only is that ironic, but it's absolutely cruel that nobody believed her when she made repeated protests to her superiors.
In 2021, she hoped for a fresh start at the Army Foundation College in Harrogate. After she accepted a post as an instructor at the Army Foundation College in Harrogate, Knight hoped things would be different. Her role was to train new recruits who enlist at 16 and 17. But from the outset, she said she did not feel welcome. In her witness statement, she detailed how colleagues took it in turns to shout out, "Watermelon!" anytime I walked into the room. Every time they did this, the others would laugh. She heard colleagues talking about her getting lynched and being tarred and feathered. One said he would put her in a hot box, a reference to a scene in the film Django Unchained in which a black female slave is tortured by being locked inside a wooden coffin-type box. The harassment was relentless, and she felt humiliated and mocked. The Tarantino film was regularly played by her colleagues, seemingly on repeat. Tarantino's films often include exaggerated and graphic depictions of violence, and in this particular film, the portrayal of black characters in a context of slavery and brutalization can perpetuate harmful stereotypes. By repeatedly exposing Kerry-Ann to these scenes, her colleagues were attempting to dehumanize her, reducing her to the stereotypes portrayed in the film. This act was a way to constantly remind her of their perceived superiority and her supposed inferiority. In her witness statement, Kerry-Ann mentioned specific references to the film made by her colleagues, such as threats of getting lynched and being put in a hot box, a form of torture depicted in the movie. These references were direct threats, using the film's content to vividly convey the kinds of violence her abusers were willing to fantasize about or even enact. The use of the Tarantino film by Kerry-Ann Knight's colleagues was a deliberate and malicious tactic to harass, intimidate, and psychologically torment her. It was part of a broader pattern of racist and sexist abuse that sought to undermine her sense of security, dignity, and humanity. Over several years, Knight tried to raise complaints about the racism and misogyny, informally at first, and then formally, through service complaints, the grievance scheme for members of the armed forces. She backed up her complaints with evidence, including WhatsApp screenshots and audio recordings. However, after submitting a service complaint about her treatment at AFC Harrogate, she was removed from her role training junior soldiers on the basis that her mental or emotional state was sufficiently at risk of deterioration that she should not be in a junior soldier-facing role at this time. It was a crushing blow, but Kerry-Ann refused to stay silent. "I think when it got to that stage, that's when I just realized that the Army is institutionally racist," Knight said. "And they would go above and beyond in order to discredit me as an individual, in order to protect the Army image, to portray that racism doesn't exist, even though it was there in black and white." Determined to fight back, Kerry-Ann sought legal advice in December 2022. With the support of the Center for Military Justice and the Equality and Human Rights Commission, she filed a case. It was a grueling battle, filled with emotional highs and lows. The Army's attempt to discredit her only fueled her determination. Her solicitor, Emma Norton, from the Center for Military Justice, said, "For the Army, it was not the racists that needed to be dealt with it was Kerry-Ann, because she'd had the audacity to complain about racism and misogyny. It is all dreadfully familiar, and shows again that in the British Army, it's worse to accuse someone of racism than it is to be racist."
Groups where soldiers behave like this, they must have somebody who's one step up, one rank up, a superior of some sort, who is looking at them. That there must be witnesses to this, but clearly there was an acceptance of that sort of behaviour.
That's right, and that's also a failure. The standards you walk past are the standards you accept. None of that is appropriate, and the chain of command failed. That is exactly why she had to go to the employment tribunal. Not only was she failed by the chain of command, that's the vertical cohesion, which has been not dissimilar. She failed in her peer group.
Will there be any repercussions to this? I mean, is somebody going to take some action over this?
Well, that's the point that I mentioned earlier on. The action has already been taken in terms of two significant reports in the last 5 years, the Wigston report and the Atherton report. And of course, it's easy to deal with the consequences of this. You can, jail the people who are the perpetrators of this or take disciplinary action against them. That is not the cultural thing, which in any change program is the most difficult thing to deal with.
Many of the most recent recruits in the Army today will have joined after seeing Ms. Knight's face in a recruitment campaign. Like everyone else in the country, they have the legal right to be treated fairly regardless of who they are or what they look like. It is in part her face on recruitment posters that motivated Knight to bring her case. I wanted my story to help change the lived experience of others in the Army, Knight said. Me being their campaign girl, I'd say falsely helped to recruit individuals under false pretense to say the Army's all-inclusive.
To encourage more BAME individuals to join, because I genuinely believed at the time, if you've got more BAME individuals coming into the Army, then things will have to change. And I will not then be, say, the only target indication on parade. And what I mean by that, the only black woman in that regiment, in that unit, because it's a isolating place to be.
I really wanted to try and make an effective change. So this is why I wanted the Army to acknowledge that there was wrong and try and change the policies in some way. In June 2023, the Army settled the claim and issued an apology. They acknowledged she had to work in an unacceptable environment and failed to respond properly to her complaints. There was no admission of liability, but the apology was a bittersweet victory. Kerry-Ann's fight was not just for herself, but for all those who would follow in her footsteps. Her story shed light on the hidden realities within the Army and sparked a conversation about institutional racism and sexism. She hoped her journey would inspire change and create a more inclusive environment for future soldiers. Reflecting on her journey, she remains determined to make a difference. Her battle left scars, but it also ignited a spark of hope for a more inclusive future. Kerry-Ann's story is a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and the fight for justice.
When they tried to paint out as if I was a aggressive black woman, that was extremely tough. If it wasn't for those individuals who supported me, whether secretly or publicly, yeah, I would have been broken.
Would you recommend the Army now?
I would never encourage a woman, especially of colour, to join the Army, because it's not going to benefit your life in the long run.
Thank you for watching. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories from around the world.